On to the next.
On to the next. Are we going to next?
So you,
want to
man.
go? Anybody?
Go ahead.
I guess it's age before.
Who's your
Age before beauty, baby.
who's your guy?
I told you I was going to give maybe a little bit of a long answer. I'll try to make it short though. So
Preach it, brother.
growing up, you know, I have a couple brothers and a sister. I have a half brother in Philadelphia, but I just met him not too long ago. So growing up, and I can say this about everybody that was around me, I always try to pick the good things in people's character, you know, and then filter out the bad. Why do I mention that? Because when you say, hey, who's the most reliable person in the Bible? I'm going to use the cliche that I try to pick up good from each person. You know, David is a man after God's heart. You know, his mentality, I try to pick it up, but he wasn't a good father, right? So, you know, I try to exclude that out of the filter. And for me personally, that's how I've tried to live my life, is try to, you know, always look, you know, at the good of people, you know, adapt that to my life. So that being stated, the person that I personally love the most in the Bible, or I feel like that I'm more relatable to, is Abraham. And the reason why I say that is the story when he went to go save Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah. My mom, I love my mom. She's awesome. Even with her imperfections, she always taught me to love people regardless. And it's so funny because, you know, a lot of times when we talk about people or individuals talk about people, if you're looking at someone and let's just say you're looking at the bad, you know, like, oh, this guy is this. And then, you know, you hear people bonchinchando or tirando a alguien, you know. And my mom, regardless if the facts were true, she always will go back to say, hey, man, that's a man or a woman that God made. She will try to look at the good and like try to justify the situation. So once again, back to Abraham, when God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, he's like, hey, what if there's 50 good people in there? Would you save the city? And he's like, hold on. If there's 40 people in there, would you save the city? Why do I mention that? Is because that's how I feel right now. Like, I want God to obviously save the world and everybody goes to heaven, which reality we know is not true, but that's my mentality. Like, you know, I want God to show his mercy and to his grace, or when I see someone that's broken or not perfect, I see a child of God. And I use this story. I remember I used it in a preaching one time. We all have children here. And could you imagine your child is working on a project for, let's just say, weeks and weeks. And when he turns that project into the teacher and the teacher says that project is not good, this project is trash. You know how much effort that your kid put in that project. It'll be devastating as a parent. So who am I to judge someone when I know for a fact that God created that person? And I guess the Sodom and Gomorrah is like, you know, I look at people and I just want to see the good in people and not the bad. And that's, I know that he was a God-fearing man. For him to want to sacrifice his son out of obedience to God, I really gravitate towards that.
That was Isaac, right?
No, yeah, his son Isaac, but Abraham, you know, being obedient. And then also in the beginning of when it starts talking about Abraham in Genesis, I believe in chapter 12:1, it talks about, you know, bless who blesses you and curse who curses you. That's another thing that I feel like I relate to, because as long as I'm with God and I'm on my path with God, I feel like nobody can touch me. Like I feel like what do you call the monster? A made man. You know, I'm a made man in God's eyes. That He will continue to bless me, bless those around me, and anybody who comes against me, just know, you know, my God is you're gonna have to deal with. So.
You serve a powerful God.
Amen to that. So that's my relatable person, Abraham.
I mean, at least regarding the story of Abraham, again, God calls him. There's no people. Like, he has family, but there's no people. So it's not like Moses, he heard about God. Abraham is the one that's going to bring God to the people. And that's interesting.
He just heard a voice.
Yeah. So Moses had the benefit that he had history and he saw a burning bush. Abraham just heard a voice in the wind. That's why, like, when we talk about faith, like in Hebrews, it talks about like the the faith that he had. And what's astonishing, I know we had this conversation before, is that he goes out, but he has faith that even if God kills his son, his faith is that he's going to bring him back. His faith is that something else is going to happen, that God is going to provide. So even though we all want to make it sound like, well, Abraham had faith that nothing was going to happen, the Bible tells us that he had faith that he had to be obedient to God based on whatever consequences were going to happen. Yeah, regarding that. So to me, like Abraham is like, it's amazing. Like to be able to have that type of faith, to be able to. We talked about Moses as a friend of God. Abraham sat with God. Let's just put it like that, because that conversation was very personal. It's like I could imagine him sitting on a hill, like if God was right there. So God, so if you have 50 people, if you have 40. That was an intimate conversation, very intimate. I use the word intimate tonight on various occasions, but I feel like these people that we're bringing up, they had a specific relationship with God that we should all try to pursue. And in that sense, like that made Abraham so different, because God was having conversations. Abraham was having conversations with God.
Yeah.
My perspective. Now, from my perspective, I think that what I can take most of Abraham, it's the faith part. It's very difficult to believe. It's very. I don't want to sound. How can I say this? Incredulo. I forgot the word in English.
Incredulous.
Incredulous. But it's difficult to believe, and when it comes to Abraham, actually, he was gonna kill his kid. We call it a sacrifice, but he tied him up. He grabbed the knife. He brought the knife up, and he was gonna sacrifice his kid, his own, the one who he loved, because it says it that way. Maybe I don't know if in the English version it says it, but in Spanish it says "al que tú amas," who he loved. In order to do that, just to believe in God and that amount of with that passion and with that obedience, it's just something that I don't. I think it's besides Abraham, it's unheard of, and you don't see it again in the Bible till John chapter 3 verse 16. It's something that we have to. It's just to obey God without having any guarantees,
No hesitation.
no hesitations. Yo, go.
The obedience, because if I don't say it, I'm going to lose it. Obedience is definitely a word. His faith, a God-fearing man. But think about it. He was 75 years old when God called him to leave his land. He didn't even hesitate. And I know for me, when I met my wife, I want to say I was a mama boy, but
I could see it.
I lived in my mom's house until I got married and was to move out, and I was like 25, 26 at the time, 26, 27 at the time. And just to leave my mom's house, it was something that I was uncomfortable with, because I ain't never left, and, there was a lot of doubt, whatever. He lived in this land for 75 years. God called him. He packed his bags. He didn't even hesitate. He went. Mm-hmm. Of course, the son being obedient to his son. Another thing that to me was extremely impactful is the circumcision. Like, he was such a God-fearing man that he told them, made a pact with him so they can, obviously do that. And not only that, we know medical is a lot different then than it was now. But not only that, everybody in that household did it. Everybody followed this man because he was such a God-fearing man. So that means when people identified them, their wives, they knew that these people had a pact with God. If a Gentile, if a Jew or an Israelite or anybody from his descendant try to go outside of their marriage, the Gentile would say, hold on, I can't be with you because you're part of that pact. So to me, I always look at it from a spiritual standpoint, that I want to be spiritually uncircumcised from all sin, So I am a reflection of Christ. And his obedience to me, man, is like we look at the world right now, what everything is going on. Why is that happening? Because we are no longer being obedient to the word of God and what we've been taught. Even when it comes to America, how dysfunctional at times we may be, seen. And it's funny because I was in Toastmasters, and we always do the pledge of the allegiance. And, I think the last time it really stuck to me when it's like one nation under God, like that line right there. And it's like, we forgot that. We can't forget that we're a nation that is under God, under his protection, under his, grace. And we need to be obedient. And, Abraham is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
And there was a real quick because we're talking about faith right now, and faith goes a very long ways, right? And for anyone out there that wants to basically see how faith has played its own role within the Bible itself, there's in Hebrews 1 or Hebrews 11:1, it starts there where faith in action. And I know we talked about that a couple episodes ago, but let me just read the first and the last thing to sum it up. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And then basically goes on to everyone had faith from God, forming the world and everything in it, and the universe itself, and basically things that are not visible to our own naked eyes to see, such as His glory and His will. And then basically, through Abel, through Enoch, through Noah, all their things that they've done because God's will, because He commanded it to be so. And then basically the very last, what is it called? Hebrews 12. It starts with, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured on the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will now grow weary and lose heart. So you would not grow weary and lose heart. There we go. But that I kind of read that as you were talking though, and it kind of made sense of what you were actually saying. You know what I mean?
I made sense.
You see, sometimes, man,
The unequipped.
the cool thing is when he's being obedient and he's demonstrating faith, we need to know what God was asking of him. God made him a promise, right? God is telling him, "Give me your promise. Give me your lineage. How do you pronounce
Lineage?
it? Lineage.
Yeah.
Give me your lineage. Hand it over." What he was giving him back what he gave him, what he wasn't gonna have. And if you lose your kids, it's over for your family, bro. So what God was asking for him. He actually says, "Give me your son, your only son, the one you love." He was, and it's gonna be a theological point. He was telling him, "Give me the one who took my place." That's what he was asking for. He created an idol in his son, because God can promise you anything, but that promise can't be your idol.
Yeah.
A lot of people have fallen because they couldn't handle God's blessing. If you look, the Bible's full of examples of that. They get the blessing, they can't handle it, and you can see it even now today. Like people, they start receive the blessings of the Lord, and they lose sight of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So the blessing end up becoming
A curse.
a curse. That's why, like it happened in Exodus, where donde dice, si tu presencia no conmigo no va,
If your presence doesn't come with me,
then I don't want to go to the promised land. So like we hear the song and it sounds so lovely, but Moses is telling God, is like, you're promising me a land that's gonna be blessed, that's gonna have milk and honey and all this stuff.
Abraham.
That was Abraham. I'm sorry.
Are we on Moses again? I'm sorry. It's the
I'm
hour, guys.
yeah, like
It's late.
It's late. Yeah, that was Moses. We're talking about Abraham. Man, sorry for that. I need
Oh
my
my God.
coffee.
God promises that to Abraham too.
I know, but that he's the extension of all that.
Yeah.
So, but going back, you're right. It's Moses, and the thing is that I thought about the verse right now in my mind regarding Moses. Now I lost the train of sight.
The most important part, he had faith, guys. He didn't. Thing is, he didn't doubt. To love God to that extent, not to doubt when he's asking you to give him back his. It was his. Isaac was his. It was God, and for God to say, "Give me your blessing back," and he's willing to just give it back because he knew he had a promise, but what if he just heard a voice and it wasn't God's voice? What if he would that sort of stuff? I don't know if it ever happens to you guys when God promised you something and you see that he gives it momentarily and all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
Was it God really? All of the what could have been going through his mind, and he still said, "If you want to take it back." You can get it back. You gave it to me. You can have them.
Yeah.
And to have that level of faith, it's something enormous that we should all aspire to.
Okay, now I regain my train of thought. So what I was gonna say is that, and it was true, that happened to Moses. But we were talking about how the blessings sometimes blinds us and actually ends up becoming a curse. So Moses was promised this promised land, and it's kind of like, God, you could provide all this to me, but if your presence is not there, I don't want it. Like, I don't want it. And that's the most important thing, that if we get a blessing, we got to remember, if Jesus is not the center, you should reflect if that blessing is actually a blessing. And it could be a blessing, it's just that we don't know how to manage it. So and that mindset, Moses was like, I mean, even though he didn't end up being in the promised land, but he understood at that moment, like, I need your presence with me. It's not going to work out if I do it alone.
See, there's another transgression. Misadministrating God's gift.
Yep.
And how many times does it happen to us where we're thinking we're the center of the universe and we have it all? We got ministry, we got a good job, a good car, a good family, and we think that we're made, and we end up making idols of everything.
And that's the thing, falling short of his grace, but that's because we take the blessing, we run with it, and then we make it our own kind of thing.
Yeah.
That we did it, and it's for our glory, basically, and we take that glory away from God. That's where a lot of people lose sight, like you said. I think we are equipped. At a certain point, we come to the part that we understand what God's will is for us. We understand how far our hands can reach without, God being a part of it. And then we end up asking, hey, God, take it that extra mile, take it that extra step to get it done. But without that recognition or without that mindset of, God, where you at every given time to make sure that I'm following through with what you say, that this grace is all for you and not for myself, that's where we end up falling short at a lot of times. And that's where a lot of these big pastors, again, mega churches fall short of that very quickly when it's all about money. And then it became, I'm doing this. I'm the success of this church. I'm going to leave it into your hands. You better not mess it up. But it's like, you didn't start the church. God did.
Yeah.
You didn't bring the people in. God did.
You guys got to watch Jesus Revolution. It deals with that too. It's awesome. The movie's awesome.
I remember.
It's awesome.
Where is it on?
Jesus Revolution. It's on Redbox right now.
Okay.
What was the movie? God's Not Dead.
Redbox.
That was a
Not
pretty
Dead,
good series too.
Yeah.
But
It was
it's just
the-
it's just a simple
oh, yeah,
fact though.
Redbox.
We all abuse
Come on. Didn't say
what God has
Blockbuster.
given us for our own glory though. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, and this, we got to be careful with that.
And Abraham wasn't perfect. He couldn't handle his wife's beauty. So every time they went to a place, that's my sister.
That's my sister. I couldn't understand that, bro.
That was my sister.
yeah.
Like, because it felt like he was going to somebody important, like if it was a king or something like that. And they saw his wife attractive. So it seems like It seems like his wife was attracted based on everything that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah.
And
every time they identified that, he's like, wow,
and then it
Which
was
is
kind
kind
of
of
like, and it was kind of like he didn't see himself sufficient enough to be at a level where they would respect him having her, or they would put their lives in danger. And that's after experiencing everything God's been providing him, because God is the one that's providing him while he's going from one place to another.
Right.
He's not even still. He's a nomad. Like he's going from there and there, and God is providing, and God is growing, God is multiplying, and his servants are following him. And also, like besides that, like it's like one of the things that Abraham provides us is that if God promises you something, don't force the promise.
Correct. Don't rush it.
Don't force the promise, because God is eternal, so he knows exactly when the promise needs to happen. And in his case, I mean, his wife got involved and says, you know what, I think like God said you're going to have kids, take my servant. And and the thing is that he forced the promise. That's his son. And you know that's his son. You know what? You know why you know that's his son? Because that baby was crying, and God heard the baby, and God attended the baby. And we talk about Isaac as the promise, but that doesn't mean that this Ishmael isn't blessed because he's part of Abraham. He probably came into slavery. There's a lot of theological things about that. Not the part that I want to touch up.
His people became a great nation and an empire. So
Yeah.
Syria.
So regarding all of that, but there was still like when he cried, God heard him. It's kind of like I can't ignore something that came from Abraham.
And gives them a promise.
Yep.
Gives them a promise. Which
But
is,
but
wow.
but that relationship,
That's crazy.
that it becomes messed up because they forced it. They forced it.
They call it the battle of the mothers right now. It's still going on. 8,000 years later, we're still suffering
The consequences.
the consequences of one.
Of trying to help God out.
Yeah.
I mean, we're here to call and do stuff, but let God provide the promise he's going to provide. Don't force it.
That reminds me of the story of Saul when he was, when the prophet Samuel, I believe it was, he's like, hey, don't go into battle until we have the blessing from God. And he
Made
tried
a
to
sacrifice.
Yep. And he went ahead. He's like, you know what? We're going to do it on our own,
Yeah.
And it's funny too, man, because I've been preaching this to my kids a lot lately. When you're not obedient to God, there's consequences.
Yep.
Whenever you're not following the rules, there's consequences, man. And that's why I'm just so amazed with that obedience. Even not only Abraham, but even all those people around him of how obedient it was, because how obedient he was to God and how faithful he was to God.